I thought my life was perfect. My husband and I had built a home together, a life filled with memories, laughter, and dreams for the future. Every morning, I woke up thinking I was the luckiest woman alive. I trusted him completely, believing that our love was unbreakable. But sometimes, even the strongest foundations hide cracks. It started with small things. He would come home late without explanation, his phone was always locked, and he seemed distant and distracted, as if a shadow followed him everywhere. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself it was just stress from work, but my heart whispered otherwise. I could feel it, a gnawing suspicion that refused to leave. One evening, while he thought I was asleep, I noticed his phone left unattended on the table. My hands shook as I picked it up. I had promised myself I would never invade his privacy, but this time, the curiosity and fear overpowered my hesitation. The messages I found were like knives to my chest. He was talking to another woman, laughing, and planning secret meetings. My heart sank, and tears blurred my vision. The man I loved, the man I trusted more than anyone, had betrayed me. I felt a storm of emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief, but also something else, something quiet and determined. I did not want to lose the life I had worked so hard to build. All those years, the love, the home, the memories, they were mine too. I realized leaving would be easy, but it would not teach him the lesson he deserved. I wanted more than revenge. I wanted him to regret it, to understand the value of what he had lost. That night, I cried, but I also made a choice. I would not let his betrayal break me. I would rise, stronger and better. I would take care of myself, grow beyond the woman he thought he could replace, and make him see the mistake he had made. I started imagining a new version of myself, a woman confident, independent, radiant, surrounded by positivity and happiness. This was the moment my transformation began. The next morning, I woke up with a new resolve. I refused to let his betrayal define me. I started small, taking care of my body, my health, and my appearance. I went for long walks, ate better, and began exercising to feel stronger and more alive. I looked in the mirror and began seeing a reflection I barely recognized, a woman who could survive anything, who could shine even in the darkest moments. But I knew beauty alone would not be enough. I needed to grow, to become someone who could not be ignored, someone whose value was undeniable. I enrolled in online courses, learning skills I had always dreamed of but never had time for. I read books that taught me independence, confidence, and the power of self-respect. Each day, I felt myself becoming smarter, sharper, and more capable. I also began reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with over the years. These were people who inspired me, who lifted me up and reminded me of my worth. We laughed, shared our dreams, and encouraged each other to chase happiness relentlessly. With each meeting, each conversation, I felt lighter, freer, as if I was shedding the weight of betrayal from my shoulders. I started attending small social events and gatherings, places where I could meet new people and experience life beyond my home. I discovered hobbies I never imagined enjoying: painting, cooking, and even learning to play an instrument. My days were full, vibrant, and purposeful. I realized that the world was bigger than my pain, and it had so much to offer. Meanwhile, my husband began noticing the change in me. He saw the way I carried myself, the sparkle in my eyes, and the confidence in my steps. For the first time in a long while, I felt his attention, a mixture of surprise, confusion, and something else, jealousy. I could tell he was wondering if I had moved on, if I had found someone else to fill the emptiness he had created. But I had not. My heart was still mine, but it was no longer captive to him. I smiled inside, knowing that I was winning in a way he would never expect. I was not seeking revenge through betrayal. I was seeking it through growth, through self-respect, and through becoming someone irresistible, not because of flirtation or lies, but because of my own power. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. My transformation was not sudden but steady. Every skill I learned, every friendship I nurtured, and every moment I invested in myself made me stronger and more radiant. I had become a woman who could no longer be taken for granted, a woman who would never be invisible again. And deep down, I knew he was watching, wondering, regretting. But I kept my focus. I was not doing this for him. I was doing this for me, for the woman who deserved respect, love, and happiness. Months had passed since I first discovered his betrayal. In that time, I had become a woman who radiated confidence, joy, and independence. Every step I took, every smile I gave, carried a strength that was new to me. I no longer waited for his approval or validation. I had created my own world, full of color, excitement, and self-respect. It did not take long for my husband to notice. At first, it was subtle, a glance that lingered too long, a question about my day that seemed too pointed, a tone in his voice that carried surprise. He saw me glowing in ways he had never encouraged, in ways he had tried to diminish with his lies and neglect. I could feel his unease, and for the first time, the power in our relationship shifted. I continued living my life fully, never letting him see my inner plans. I spent more time with my friends, attending gatherings, exploring new hobbies, and even taking trips alone to places I had always wanted to see. Every post I shared on social media and every story I shared with friends showcased my happiness, independence, and vibrancy. It was impossible for him not to notice. A part of me enjoyed the subtle tension I created. I never cheated, never lied, but the idea that I might be moving on, might be finding someone else, made him restless. He began calling more often, checking in, and asking questions. I pretended not to notice. I kept my calm, my dignity, and my smile. I was no longer the vulnerable woman who would cry at his every word. I was unshakable, untouchable by his guilt or manipulation. He began changing little by little. His actions, once careless and thoughtless, grew more attentive. He complimented me, helped around the house, and even asked for advice on things he had never cared about before. It was as if my transformation had awakened something in him, something he had taken for granted. But I was careful. I did not give him the satisfaction of knowing he was being punished through jealousy. I simply lived my life, fully and unapologetically. The power of my growth, my happiness, and my independence became the mirror in which he saw his mistakes reflected. Every evening, I reflected on the woman I had become. I remembered the tears, the pain, and the betrayal, and I felt a quiet pride. I had not sought revenge through anger or manipulation. My revenge was subtler, stronger, and far more satisfying. It was the unstoppable woman I had created from the ashes of heartbreak. And as he watched, unsettled and uncertain, I knew the moment of reckoning was coming. He would soon understand that the woman he had tried to hurt could not only survive without him but thrive, shine, and reclaim everything he had thought he controlled. It was a quiet morning when I first noticed the change. He walked into the room with a heaviness I had never seen before, a kind of tension that seemed to cling to him. He was no longer the confident, careless man who had betrayed me. Instead, he looked uncertain, almost fragile, as if the foundation of his life had begun to shake. I had continued living my life with joy and purpose. My days were filled with laughter, learning, and new experiences. I had painted, learned new skills, spent hours with friends who inspired me, and traveled to places I had always dreamed of. I was thriving, glowing, and fully alive. And it was impossible for him not to notice. He started asking questions, small and hesitant. How was your day? Who did you meet today? What are you working on now? At first, I answered politely, keeping my life to myself in detail. I let him feel the distance, the independence that now defined me. He was searching, probing, trying to understand a woman who no longer needed him, a woman who had become her own world. At night, I could feel his gaze linger, sometimes over my shoulder, sometimes from across the room. He was watching, but not in the way of love. It was the uneasy attention of someone realizing the cost of their mistakes. He could see that I had not only healed from his betrayal, but I had grown into someone far beyond the woman he had known. I noticed the small gestures too. He was more attentive, more cautious, almost afraid to speak without thinking. The way he treated me had changed, subtly at first, but unmistakably. He offered to help with chores, complimented me in ways that had felt foreign before, and even tried to initiate conversations about things that mattered to me. Yet, I remained calm and distant. I did not rush to forgive or reward him for his new behavior. My power lay in my patience, in the quiet strength I had built. He could feel the walls I had placed around my heart, the independence that no one could shake. And every day, I watched him wrestle with the reality he had created for himself, a reality where the woman he once took for granted no longer relied on him, no longer depended on him, and no longer feared losing him. Deep inside, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not the bitter kind, but the calm, unshakable contentment of knowing that I had reclaimed my life. He was beginning to understand, finally, that betrayal had consequences, and that a woman who had been broken could rise higher than anyone had imagined. He had started to regret, truly and deeply. And I knew, in my heart, that this was only the beginning. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. I continued building my life with patience and determination. Every morning, I woke up feeling stronger, wiser, and more radiant than the day before. I no longer measured my happiness by his attention or approval. I was my own source of joy, my own inspiration, and my own strength. He began to try in ways I had never imagined. At first, it was small gestures, bringing me coffee, asking about my day, and complimenting me in ways that felt new and awkward. But I knew these were not enough. He had broken my trust once, and trust, once fractured, cannot be repaired with shallow words or fleeting attention. I continued to live fully, to laugh with friends, to explore new hobbies, and to travel to places I had always dreamed of. I painted my walls with joy, not bitterness. I learned new skills, from cooking gourmet meals to mastering photography. Each accomplishment reminded me that I was no longer the same woman who had cried in secret, heartbroken over betrayal. He watched, helplessly at times, as my life blossomed without him. His regret grew heavier with each passing day. He could see that I was no longer a woman who could be taken for granted, no longer someone whose heart could be easily manipulated. He began to question his choices, to feel the emptiness that came from losing the loyalty and love he had once ignored. One evening, I noticed him lingering at the doorway as I laughed with friends over dinner. His eyes betrayed a mix of longing, confusion, and remorse. He realized that the woman he had betrayed was not only still here, but thriving in ways he could never match. He began to try harder, genuinely this time, not out of obligation, but out of fear of losing me completely. I did not give in. I kept my heart guarded, my life focused on growth, joy, and fulfillment. I wanted him to see that love and trust are earned, not demanded. I wanted him to understand the depth of his mistakes and the value of the woman he had once betrayed. Slowly, he began to change. He listened more, he helped more, and he genuinely tried to be a better man. But I remained cautious. My happiness was not dependent on his efforts. It was born from my own resilience, my own growth, and my own self-love. Every step he took toward me now was a test, a reflection of his remorse and willingness to change. And every day, I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that my life, my power, and my happiness were completely under my control. He had tried to break me, but instead, he had unknowingly crafted the woman I had always been capable of becoming. And as he looked at me, regret deep in his eyes, I realized the truth. Revenge was not about hurting him. Revenge was about rising, about reclaiming my life, and about showing him that betrayal could never destroy a woman determined to thrive. The moment finally came when he could no longer hide his feelings. After months of watching me grow, laugh, and thrive without him, he began to feel the weight of his actions pressing on him. The man who once took my love for granted now stood before a truth he could no longer deny. He had almost lost the most precious part of his life. He tried everything to reach me. At first, it was subtle. A message here, a call there, an attempt to ask about my day. I answered politely, never showing the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I had learned patience, restraint, and the strength that comes from protecting my heart. I knew he was testing me, and I would not rush to forgive. Then came the day when he finally came to me with honesty, a raw and vulnerable honesty I had never seen from him before. He admitted his mistakes, his betrayals, and the pain he had caused. He confessed his regret, his loneliness, and his longing to make things right. I listened quietly, feeling a mix of emotions, hurt, disbelief, and a cautious spark of hope. He begged for forgiveness, his voice trembling, his eyes filled with the same desperation I had once felt when I had trusted him completely. He promised to change, to respect me, and to never take me for granted again. He spoke of the lessons he had learned, the nights he had spent thinking about his actions, and the realization that he had almost destroyed everything that truly mattered. But I did not immediately forgive him. I had spent months rebuilding myself, regaining my confidence, and learning the power of self-worth. Forgiveness would not come easily, it had to be earned. I told him I needed time, that actions mattered more than words, and that true change required patience, consistency, and proof. He accepted my terms, humbled by the realization that his past mistakes had consequences. He became a better man in the eyes of everyone, not just me. He listened more, he cared more, and he showed love in ways that were sincere and steady. I observed him from a distance, noting the subtle yet powerful transformation in his character. During this period, I felt a quiet triumph. Not because I had made him suffer, but because I had reclaimed my power. I had turned betrayal into strength, heartbreak into growth, and despair into independence. He had learned the hard way that taking someone for granted could cost him more than he was willing to pay. And in my heart, I knew that forgiveness would come, not from weakness, but from wisdom. I had tested him, watched him grow, and ensured that if he returned, it would be as a man truly worthy of the love he had once betrayed. After months of watching him change, I knew the moment of truth had arrived. Forgiveness was not about words or promises. It was about proof, about seeing whether the man who had betrayed me could truly become the person he claimed to be. I decided to observe, to test, and to ensure that my heart would not be given away lightly. I continued living my life as I always had, laughing with friends, exploring new hobbies, and pursuing the dreams I had set aside for too long. He saw my independence, my happiness, and my confidence, but this time, it was different. He no longer tried to manipulate me with small gestures. Instead, he matched my growth, showing patience, respect, and genuine care. I set subtle challenges for him, small moments that revealed his sincerity. When I needed help with a project, he offered assistance without hesitation. When I sought advice or support, he listened intently, never interrupting or dismissing my feelings. When I celebrated my achievements, he rejoiced with me, not with envy, but with pride in my success. Every action, every choice he made, became proof of his transformation. I watched him step away from old habits, abandoning the carelessness that had once caused me pain. I observed him becoming the kind of man who would never again risk losing the woman he loved. Even in moments when he faltered, when old instincts of selfishness surfaced, I saw him recognize them immediately and correct his behavior. He apologized sincerely, not for the sake of forgiveness, but because he truly understood the weight of his past mistakes. Through this process, I realized that revenge had never been about punishment. It had been about awakening him, forcing him to see the value of what he had taken for granted. And now, through his genuine efforts, I saw a man reborn, one who had learned humility, empathy, and the importance of love built on respect. In testing him, I also discovered a deeper truth within myself. I had grown stronger than I had ever imagined. I had learned that independence and self-respect are the foundations of happiness. I had realized that a woman's power lies not in seeking revenge through harm, but in reclaiming her life and showing the world, and the one who betrayed her, that she is unstoppable. As he continued to prove himself, I felt the walls around my heart begin to soften. Forgiveness was no longer just a possibility. It was becoming a choice I could make with confidence and clarity. I knew that when I finally said yes, it would be not because I needed him, but because I wanted to share my happiness with a man who had truly earned a place in my life. By now, months had passed since the day I first discovered his betrayal. My life had transformed in ways I had never imagined. I was no longer the woman defined by pain, sadness, or fear of being alone. I was radiant, independent, and unstoppable. Every morning, I woke up with purpose, excitement, and gratitude for the life I had reclaimed. I had learned to love myself in ways I had never done before, and that love radiated out into everything I did. I focused on my passions and dreams. I poured time into learning, exploring, and mastering new skills. Painting, photography, cooking, and even small business ventures became my playgrounds. I surrounded myself with friends who inspired me, who lifted me up, and who reminded me daily that happiness is a choice and growth is endless. My social life blossomed, full of laughter, joy, and new experiences. Each day I became more confident, more attractive, and more alive. Meanwhile, he could not ignore the change. Every time he saw me laughing with friends, glowing with confidence, or sharing moments of joy, he felt a pang of regret so sharp it cut through his pride. He had imagined that betraying me would give him power, control, or satisfaction, but instead, it revealed his weakness. He realized, too late, that the life we had built together, the love he had taken for granted, and the woman he had betrayed were far more valuable than he had ever imagined. He tried to approach me, but this time, I was cautious. I welcomed his presence, but I did not give away my trust. Every gesture, every compliment, and every word from him had to prove that he had truly changed. I observed his actions closely, seeing the difference between the man he was and the man he had become. He was patient, attentive, and respectful, yet there was an unmistakable weight of regret in his eyes. It was during this time that I fully realized the power I had gained, not just over him, but over my own life. I was no longer living for him, for his approval, or for anyone else. I was living for me. My happiness was no longer tied to his actions or his love. I had become a woman whose life was complete, fulfilling, and radiant even without him. And in that completeness, I found a quiet joy that made his past betrayal irrelevant to my present strength. He began to understand the consequences of his actions in ways he could not have anticipated. Seeing me thrive, independent and happy, was a revelation. He realized that betrayal does not weaken the betrayed, it awakens a power that cannot be ignored. He saw that his selfishness had almost cost him the love of a lifetime and that he had no right to demand forgiveness without proving he was worthy. Every day, he worked to prove himself. He listened more, he supported me without expectation, and he became genuinely invested in my happiness. He was no longer trying to win me back with words, he was doing it with actions. Slowly, I began to allow myself to hope, to see that the man I had loved could truly change. But I never let him forget the lessons he had to learn. I remained independent, thriving, and joyful, showing him that the greatest revenge is not in punishment, but in living fully. I was proof that betrayal could not destroy me and that the life I had built, my dreams, my confidence, my happiness, was mine to keep and mine to nurture. And then, one quiet evening, I realized something profound. I had become the woman I had always wanted to be. I was strong, radiant, and complete. I no longer needed him to define me, but I chose to share my life with him. Not because I needed him, but because I wanted to see the man who had once betrayed me become worthy of the love he had almost lost. In that moment, I understood the full meaning of my journey. I had turned heartbreak into strength, betrayal into growth, and pain into power. I had risen from the ashes of hurt and betrayal, not with anger, not with revenge, but with life, joy, and unstoppable resilience. And in doing so, I had shown him the most important lesson of all. Never take a woman's love for granted, because when she rises, nothing can hold her back. By now, it was undeniable, he had changed. The man who once betrayed me had transformed into someone humble, patient, and truly respectful. He no longer tried to manipulate or control me. He no longer assumed my love would always be there. Instead, he showed through consistent actions that he had learned, grown, and deeply regretted the pain he had caused. He approached me carefully, understanding that forgiveness could not be demanded, it had to be earned. He admitted his mistakes again, more sincerely than ever before. He spoke not only of regret but also of understanding the depth of the hurt he had inflicted, the trust he had shattered, and the love he had almost destroyed. His words were not dramatic or forced, they were honest, raw, and reflective of the man he had become. I listened. I observed. I measured every word, every gesture, and every expression. I remembered the nights I had cried alone, the countless hours of rebuilding my confidence, and the strength I had gained. I remember the independence, the skills, the friends, the joy I had cultivated. Forgiveness would not erase what had happened, but it could mark a new beginning if he truly deserved it. He continued to show his commitment, not through grand gestures, but through steady, consistent effort. He respected my time, my decisions, and my space. He celebrated my achievements without jealousy. He encouraged my passions and my independence. He had become a partner, not a predator, a supporter, not a selfish husband. And in those moments, I realized something vital. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the understanding that people can grow, that mistakes can teach, and that love, when rooted in respect, can survive even the deepest betrayals. I made my choice. I forgave him, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. I chose to share my life with a man who had truly learned the value of the woman he loved. But I also knew that my forgiveness would not make me the same woman I was before. I was stronger, wiser, and fully aware of my worth. My love would now be guarded, intentional, and empowered. As he held my hand, I felt the past years, the pain, the betrayal, the growth, merge into a quiet triumph. I had emerged from heartbreak not as a victim, but as a woman in full control of her life, her happiness, and her love. And he, the man who had once thought he could destroy me, had finally earned the right to stand beside me again, not by demanding it, but by proving he was worthy. The choice was mine, and I made it with clarity and strength. Forgiveness was no longer a gesture of weakness, it was a celebration of resilience, a recognition of growth, and the start of a love reborn on new, unshakable foundations. The day I finally embraced forgiveness, I felt a weight lift from my heart. Not the weight of betrayal, that had long transformed into strength, but the weight of uncertainty, doubt, and the fear that love could be dangerous. I had faced heartbreak, conquered it, and emerged more powerful than I had ever imagined. Our relationship did not magically return to what it had been. It was something better, stronger, wiser, and built on honesty and respect. He was no longer the man who had betrayed me. He had become a partner who truly understood the value of love, the importance of trust, and the consequences of his past actions. Every day, he showed commitment not because he feared losing me, but because he had learned to honor me, appreciate me, and respect the woman I had become. I had also changed forever. I no longer relied on anyone else to define my happiness. My life was full of purpose, joy, and independence. I had learned that self-respect is not just a principle, it is the foundation of every healthy relationship. I had learned that the greatest revenge is not in hurting someone else but in rising above pain, reclaiming your life, and becoming unstoppable. Together, we began to rebuild our life, but on new terms. There was honesty where once there had been secrecy. There was partnership where once there had been indifference. There was love where once there had been betrayal. And through it all, I remained the same woman I had become during my journey, strong, confident, radiant, and fully aware of her worth. I realized that life does not always give second chances, and when it does, they are not gifts, they are tests. Forgiveness was my choice, but it was also my triumph. I chose to love again, not out of need, but out of wisdom. I chose to trust, not blindly, but with understanding. And in doing so, I discovered a truth more powerful than revenge, more fulfilling than anger, that a woman who knows her worth can face betrayal, rise above it, and create a life that no one can shake. And as I looked at him, this man who had once hurt me so deeply, I knew that our love was reborn. Not perfect, but stronger. Not naive, but wiser. Not dependent, but free. We had survived betrayal, learned from it, and emerged together, better than ever. I had paid him back, but not with anger or pain. I had paid him back with life, my life, and in doing so, made him understand the value of everything he had tried to destroy. And in that understanding, true love had returned. I had risen. I had grown. I had conquered. And I had loved again, on my own terms, unstoppable and free.